Hello and welcome to RAIN Podcast. I'm Dr. Maya Bennett, a clinical psychologist specializing in emotional resilience. Today, we're diving into a topic that touches us all at some point in our lives: loneliness. We've titled this episode Embracing Solitude because we'll be exploring not just the challenges of feeling alone, but the journey toward finding strength in those moments.
And I'm James Rivera, mental health advocate and writer. Thank you for joining us today on this deeply personal exploration. You know, Maya, loneliness is such a universal experience, yet it feels so isolating when we're in the middle of it. That paradox has always fascinated me.
That's exactly right, James. What makes loneliness so challenging is that very contradiction. Everyone experiences it, yet when we're lonely, we feel as though we're the only ones who understand that particular pain. Research consistently shows that loneliness isn't just an emotional state. It has profound effects on our physical and mental well-being.
I've experienced that myself. During a particularly difficult period after my divorce, I felt a kind of loneliness that seemed to physically hurt, like an actual weight on my chest. Recent studies have linked chronic loneliness to increased risks of heart disease, stroke, and immune system problems. It literally affects our bodies.
The research is quite striking. Prolonged loneliness activates our body's stress responses, increasing inflammation and potentially compromising our immune systems. One study even suggested that the health impact of chronic loneliness could be equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. But what's equally concerning is the impact on our mental health.
That connection is powerful. When I was at my loneliest, my thoughts became increasingly negative. I started isolating more, which only made things worse. It became this vicious cycle that was hard to break.
That cycle is something we see clinically all the time. Loneliness can both contribute to and result from depression and anxiety. When we're lonely, our perception shifts. We become more sensitive to potential social threats, more likely to interpret ambiguous situations negatively, and more prone to remember negative social interactions while discounting positive ones.
It's like wearing gray-colored glasses that filter out all the warmth and connection that might actually be available to us. And I think what makes it particularly challenging in today's world is that we're supposedly more connected than ever through technology, yet rates of loneliness keep climbing. How do you make sense of that, Maya?
That's such an important point. We're living in what I sometimes call an illusion of connection. Social media and digital communication give us the appearance of being connected, but often lack the depth and authenticity that human beings need. Recent research shows that passive scrolling through social feeds can actually increase feelings of isolation and loneliness, rather than alleviating them.
I've noticed that in myself. Sometimes after an hour on social media, I feel more disconnected than before I started. And there's a difference between seeing snippets of people's lives and having meaningful interactions.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for our listeners to understand that there are different types of loneliness. There's social loneliness, the absence of a broader social network. Then there's emotional loneliness, the absence of intimate attachments or deep connections. And finally, there's existential loneliness, that sense that no one can truly understand our unique experience of being human.
That's a helpful framework. For me, after my divorce, I had friends around me, but I was experiencing profound emotional loneliness. I had people to do things with, but I felt like no one really understood what I was going through. Would you mind sharing a bit about your personal experiences with loneliness, Maya?
Of course. My deepest experience with loneliness came when I moved across the country for my doctoral program. I left behind my support system, and though I was surrounded by brilliant colleagues, I felt completely disconnected. What made it particularly difficult was that everyone seemed to be thriving socially while I was struggling. I later learned this is known as pluralistic ignorance, where we mistakenly believe we're the only ones experiencing something difficult, which intensifies our feelings of isolation.
That resonates deeply. During my loneliest period, I would look at other people and think, everyone else has figured this out. Everyone else has meaningful connections. What's wrong with me? That thought alone kept me from reaching out when I needed it most.
That's such a common reaction,
And it leads us to one of the cruel ironies of loneliness. When we need connection most, loneliness makes us more likely to withdraw and self-isolate. Research from the University of Chicago has shown that loneliness can trigger a self-preservation mindset that makes us more cautious about social interactions precisely when being open to connection would help us most.
So how do we break that cycle? What helped you during your time in graduate school?
For me, the turning point came when I finally took a risk and showed vulnerability. I was paired with another student for a project, and instead of maintaining the professional facade I'd been hiding behind, I admitted how difficult the transition had been. Her relief was palpable. She'd been feeling exactly the same way. That one authentic conversation led to a friendship that sustained me through the rest of my program.
That's beautiful. The courage to be vulnerable often opens doors we couldn't see before. For me, the journey out of loneliness began when I joined a support group for divorced men. At first, I went just to listen. I couldn't imagine sharing. But witnessing others speak honestly about their pain gave me permission to acknowledge my own.
That's often how healing begins, through witnessing others' truth and finding the courage to speak our own. I'd love to talk about some specific strategies that have helped both us and the clients I've worked with over the years. Would that be helpful?
Absolutely. I think our listeners would really appreciate some practical approaches.
One of the most effective strategies is what I call connection mapping. It involves identifying different types of connections we need in our lives, from intimate partnerships to casual friendships to community belonging, and then honestly assessing which areas need attention. Often we focus on what's missing rather than nurturing the connections we do have.
I like that approach. For me, I realized I had colleagues and a few close friends, but I was missing a sense of community belonging. Joining a local hiking group gave me a regular connection to people with shared interests without the pressure of deep emotional disclosure right away. It provided a foundation I could build upon.
That's exactly it, James. Sometimes we need to build connection gradually. Another strategy that research strongly supports is focusing outward, volunteering or helping others. When we're lonely, our focus tends to turn inward, but acts of service shift our attention to others' needs, which paradoxically helps us feel more connected.
That was transformative for me. 6 months after my divorce, I started volunteering at a literacy program, teaching adults to read. Being needed and making a difference for someone else gave me purpose beyond my own pain. And unexpectedly, I formed meaningful connections with both students and other volunteers.
That's a beautiful example of what psychologists call helper therapy. The person providing help often benefits as much as the recipient. Another strategy worth mentioning is developing comfort with solitude. This might sound counterintuitive when discussing loneliness, but learning to be present with ourselves without distraction can transform our relationship with being alone.
That's been a journey for me. I used to immediately turn on the TV or scroll through my phone whenever I was alone. Anything to avoid sitting with my feelings. Learning to meditate and journal helped me differentiate between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful yearning for connection, while solitude can be restorative when we choose it.
I'm glad you brought up that distinction. Embracing solitude, as our episode title suggests, doesn't mean resigning ourselves to loneliness. It means developing a healthy relationship with being alone, which paradoxically can make us more capable of meaningful connection when we're with others.
It's like that quote, I think from Rilke, about how a good marriage is one where each person appoints the other guardian of their solitude. There's something profound about learning to be whole on our own, while still recognizing our need for connection.
That's beautiful, James. And it brings us to another important point. The quality of connection matters more than quantity. Research consistently shows that having 1 or 2 deep, authentic relationships has more impact on well-being than numerous superficial connections.
That reminds me of my recovery process. I had to learn to be selective about where I invested my emotional energy. Rather than trying to maintain dozens of casual acquaintances, I focused on nurturing a few relationships where I could be fully myself, without pretense.
That's such wise advice. And for those listening who might be in the depths of loneliness right now, I want to emphasize that seeking professional support can be incredibly valuable.
Therapy provides not just connection with the therapist, but tools to address patterns that might be contributing to isolation.
Absolutely. Therapy was instrumental in my journey. My therapist helped me recognize how my fear of rejection after the divorce was causing me to withdraw from potential connections before they had a chance to develop. That awareness was the first step toward changing those patterns.
That self-awareness is so valuable, and I think it's important to acknowledge that for some people, loneliness is compounded by circumstances beyond their control: geographic isolation, mobility limitations, caregiving responsibilities, or social discrimination. In these cases, online communities can provide meaningful connection when in-person options are limited.
That's an important point. Technology can either increase our sense of isolation or be a lifeline, depending on how we use it. I've seen incredibly supportive online communities for people facing specific challenges, from rare medical conditions to unique life circumstances, where members find understanding they couldn't access locally.
Exactly. The key is using technology intentionally to deepen existing relationships or form meaningful new ones, rather than passively consuming content that leaves us feeling more isolated. Video calls with loved ones, online groups with regular interaction around shared interests, or even co-working spaces for remote workers can all foster genuine connection.
As we start to wrap up this conversation, Maya, I'm curious, what would you say to someone listening right now who feels deeply alone and can't imagine their way out of that experience?
First, I would say your loneliness is speaking a truth that matters, that human connection is essential to your well-being. Rather than judging yourself for feeling lonely, honor what that feeling is telling you about your needs. Second, remember that loneliness, no matter how profound, is not a permanent state. It's a signal, not a sentence. Small steps toward authentic connection can create ripples that transform your experience over time.
That's powerful. I would add, you are not alone in feeling alone. Millions of people are experiencing similar feelings right now, even though that can be hard to believe when you're in the middle of it. Reaching out, whether to a friend, a helpline, a support group, or a therapist, is an act of courage that honors your need for connection.
Beautiful, James. To summarize what we've explored today, loneliness has profound impacts on both mental and physical health, but there are pathways through it. Whether through vulnerability with existing connections, creating new community ties, finding meaning in helping others, or developing a healthier relationship with solitude, transformation is possible.
And that transformation often begins with the smallest steps. A text to reconnect with an old friend, joining an online group around a passion, or simply being kind to yourself in moments of isolation. The journey from loneliness to connection isn't linear, but each authentic interaction moves us forward.
Before we close, I want to remind our listeners that we have resources on coping with loneliness on the RAIN podcast website, including guided practices for self-compassion and connection mapping worksheets. We'd also love to hear your experiences and questions. Please leave them in the comments section.
And if you found value in today's conversation, please subscribe to RAIN Podcast for more content exploring the depths of human experience. Your subscription helps us continue creating these meaningful discussions and reach others who might be feeling alone.
Thank you for joining us today on this exploration of loneliness and the journey toward meaningful connection. Remember, even in your moments of greatest solitude, you are part of a human family that shares this fundamental need for belonging.
Until next time, be gentle with yourself and brave in reaching toward connection. From all of us at RAIN Podcast, thank you for listening.